My father destroyed my dreams to protect the golden child, and refused to pay for my education. But later, I got my sweet revenge. I am a 32-year-old man, and my younger brother is 28. We grew up with our father, who is now 56. Starting from middle school, my father always favored my brother, and over time, I got used to it. I was never the son my father wanted because, unlike him, I wasn't into sports or traditionally masculine activities. I was always more interested in things typically considered feminine. As a child, I was a mama's boy. I loved everything related to cooking, reading books, and even singing. My father tried to get me to play football with him, but I wasn't good at it, and gradually we drifted apart. My brother, on the other hand, was exactly the son my father wanted. He was strong, fearless, and didn't mind getting dirty or even injured. He was the ideal son for my father, and it was obvious that Dad loved my brother far more than me. He always spoke about him with excitement, but I never heard such words directed at me. My mother, however, treated us equally and was fair to both of us. That's why I loved her more. I truly tried to build a relationship with my father and spend time with him, but after we drifted apart, he showed no interest in restoring our bond. Unfortunately, the glue holding our crumbling family together was my mother, and by the time we discovered she had cancer, it was too late to do anything. She passed away before we could even come to terms with it. Her death shattered me. At that time, I fell apart a bit. My only comfort was the kitchen, where I cooked something new every day as if my life depended on it. My mother had been an amazing cook, and she often told me that if she hadn't been forced to take over her father's business, she probably would have become a chef. So, cooking became my only solace. My father and brother didn't help me cope with my emotions at all. They suppressed any reaction to my mother's death and, if anything, grew even more distant from me. While tragedies like these often bring families closer, ours was the opposite. My growing passion for cooking infuriated my father. He constantly harassed me to get out of the kitchen, for God's sake, and do something more manly. One day, his patience snapped. He told me that if he caught me in the kitchen again, he'd make me do all the household chores. He demanded I be more like my brother, which led to a huge argument. I told him he never loved me, and he admitted it. Everything came to light, and that was essentially the last honest conversation we ever had. After that, I stopped trying to win his approval entirely, and he showed no interest in fixing things. Over the next few years, I spent all my time in my room, listening to music and learning new recipes. I was determined to build a career as a chef, not just for myself but for my mother as well. Meanwhile, my father and I communicated only when necessary. My brother also paid little attention to me, ignoring me just like my father. After my mother's death, I essentially had no one to rely on. Finally, when it was time to apply to college, I decided to apply to several top culinary schools and regular colleges. I wasn't sure if my father would agree, but I had to try. That summer, I secretly interned at a restaurant to gain experience and managed to get a recommendation letter, which helped me a lot. Eventually, I was accepted into several schools, including one of the best ones in France. I was thrilled that it had finally happened, but I was also nervous about asking my father for permission to go. I was ready to beg him if he hesitated because I couldn't let go of my dream under any circumstances. When I told him everything, I was prepared for him to refuse, saying it wasn't a man's profession. But I wasn't ready for him to outright refuse to pay for my education. I still remember how stunned I was. It wasn't about the money. My father was far from poor. He had enough money to send me to France. But it wasn't about the finances. The reason was that if I went to France and attended such a prestigious school, it would make my younger brother feel insecure. He was already struggling academically and couldn't get himself together. So, my father wanted me to attend a local college or find a way to pay for my education myself. I was shocked that my father could be so cruel to his own son and didn't know what to say to him. I tried to explain how important it was to me, but my father was adamant and flat out refused to pay for my education. He even said that my brother's well-being was his top priority, and that he didn't want me to outshine him. I couldn't believe this was happening. I couldn't imagine any other father in the world crushing their child's dreams for the sake of their favorite. After a long period of pleading and tears, when he still wouldn't budge, I had a huge argument with him, said many harsh things, and left his house forever. I went to live with my aunt on my mother's side, my mom's older sister. The only reason I hadn't moved earlier was that I found comfort in the house where I grew up with my mom and didn't want to change schools, which I would have had to do if I moved in with my aunt, as she lived far from my high school. I told her everything, how my father categorically refused to pay for my education and how I needed her help. It was awful to ask her for such a large sum of money, since she wasn't as wealthy as my father, but she assured me that she would cover all my expenses. Somehow, she managed to make arrangements with her friends, and together they helped send me to the culinary school of my dreams, for which I will always be grateful. Once I got there, I worked part-time and tried to make the most of my time to justify the money spent on me. I worked very hard and gradually advanced. When I graduated, I was one of the most talented chefs in the school and found a job just a few months after graduation. I got a position at a very prestigious French restaurant and sent half of my salary to my aunt to gradually repay my debt. I was fortunate not to have taken out a student loan. Otherwise, I might never have been able to pay it off. I worked in France for several years, and then, having saved enough money to open my own restaurant, I returned home to the U.S. For a few years, I worked as a chef at another restaurant while striving toward my ultimate goal of opening my own establishment. Everything was finalized a few weeks ago, and I was finally able to open the restaurant I had been working toward for so long. 2 friends I had met in France joined my business as co-owners, so I was thrilled when they let me choose the name for the restaurant. Since we were all from the same state, we all agreed to open our establishment in the city I had chosen. I decided to name the restaurant after my mother, which turned out to be a lucky coincidence because she had a beautiful and rare name for our area. Finally, everything fell into place. A few days ago, we held a small party for selected guests before the official opening. Of course, I invited my aunt and a few of her friends who had helped fund my education. I also invited a couple of high school friends, but that was it. My father and brother were not invited for obvious reasons. Even if I had wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to do it, as I hadn't spoken to them since leaving home, and they had never tried to reach out to me. I thought this was for the best, but I should have expected them to show up anyway to claim a share of my success. And that's exactly what happened. At the party, they showed up an hour before it started. The security didn't stop them because we shared the same last name, and they claimed they were there to surprise me. At least that part was true. I was certainly surprised to see them. My father and brother greeted me as if nothing bad had ever happened between us and were incredibly friendly, probably for the first time in my life. I froze when they walked into the restaurant. My friends noticed something was off and politely greeted my relatives before leaving us alone. I'm grateful to them for sensing my discomfort. I was still in shock when suddenly they presented me with a gift, a portrait of my mother. My father even said he had commissioned it specifically for me, so I could hang it in my restaurant. He claimed that as soon as he heard about a new trendy restaurant opening in our city with such a name, he immediately knew it was mine. He even added that he had always known I had talent. My brother chimed in with the praise, saying he was incredibly proud of me. I couldn't believe my ears, and immediately knew something was off. I stayed silent, waiting for them to get to the point because I knew they had a reason for this visit. Eventually, they revealed their purpose. My brother had started working as a bartender. It was only thanks to my father persuading his friend to hire my brother as a bartender at his club that he managed to get any kind of job. My brother's grades had been steadily dropping throughout high school and college, so he never secured the high-paying position my father had always envisioned for him. On top of that, he became lazy during high school football games, which cost him a sports scholarship. Ironically, he ended up attending a community college, far from a prestigious option, because he wasn't accepted anywhere else. They wanted me to make my brother a business partner, so he could have a more respectable position, even though he hadn't done anything to earn it. I could barely contain my laughter, but somehow managed to keep a straight face. I told him I would think about it, though, of course, I had no intention of considering it. I just didn't want to reject them outright because I wanted them to stay at the party. I had a better plan to humiliate my family, who had crawled back into my life the moment they heard about my success. They seemed pleased, but little did they know what was coming. As more guests began to arrive, the restaurant was soon filled with everyone I had invited. I spent the evening mingling with the guests, while my father and brother wandered around, chatting with others. I even overheard them bragging about me to some guests, and I was amazed at their audacity. Toward the end of the evening, it was time for the hosts, my partners and me, to give speeches. My friends spoke first, as I wanted to save the best for last. Finally, it was my turn. That day, I decided to let out everything that had been bottled up inside me for years. I started by thanking all my guests and raising a toast to my mother. It was because of her that I had achieved so much. I expressed how her belief in me since childhood had given me confidence, a feeling that stayed with me even after she was gone. After honoring her memory, I addressed my father and brother. I mentioned how I had to borrow money from my aunt and her friends to attend culinary school, and thanked them for their support. Then, I got to the heart of the matter, why I had to take out a loan in the first place. I shared how I grew up with a father who never loved me, never believed in me, and constantly criticized me for being interested in feminine pursuits like cooking. I talked about my younger brother, who was a carbon copy of my father. I revealed how my father had refused to pay for my education because he feared I would outshine his favorite, my younger brother, and how that forced me to leave home. But despite all the obstacles, I managed to rise above and become the person I am today. In a way, they deserve some credit for the challenges they threw my way because they taught me just how strong I could be. As I recounted this, many guests shot angry glares at my father and brother. Even they had enough sense to at least pretend to feel ashamed, though I knew they weren't. Nevertheless, I approached them and hugged them, mimicking the affectionate scene they had put on when they arrived. Why not? Two could play this game. I announced to everyone that, since they had come to celebrate my success, I forgave them for everything that had happened in the past. I even said I was willing to offer my brother a position as a bartender at my restaurant. To the guests, it seemed like a touching reconciliation. By the end of my speech, people were clapping and even whistling. Only my family and I knew that this was nothing more than an elaborate attempt to humiliate them, and it worked. They had no choice but to smile and act grateful for my offer, because storming out in anger wasn't an option. Later, when the guests left and it was time to go home, my father and brother confronted me right outside the restaurant. They were furious. I swear I saw angry tears in my brother's eyes. They demanded to know why I had done this and said that if I didn't intend to make my brother a partner, I should have turned them away right from the start. I laughed in their faces and told them this was my way of repaying them for everything they had done to me over the years. I said they got exactly what they deserved. Then, I turned and walked away without looking back, even as I heard my brother yelling that this was the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to him. He even shouted that I would regret this, but I didn't care. I was already getting into my car and driving off. This happened a couple of days ago, and I haven't heard from them since. My aunt thinks I may have gone too far and should have just kicked them out from the start. But I disagree. They deserved it, and I don't regret humiliating my father and brother at all. Update 1. I've decided not to contact my family to apologize. Despite my aunt thinking I was too harsh, I feel no guilt for what I did, and I'm not going to pretend to regret it, let alone justify myself to them. They had the opportunity to apologize when they came to the restaurant, but they didn't. I explained this to my aunt, and while she still thinks I shouldn't have acted that way, she hasn't brought it up again. I suppose this is one of those situations where we just agree to disagree, and I'm fine with that. In other news, of course, my brother has been bad-mouthing me behind my back to our old school friends. Unfortunately, since we went to the same school, I've been getting messages from various people asking if the rumors are true, that I humiliated and kicked my father and brother out of the restaurant after supposedly feeding them 3-day-old food. Naturally, he exaggerated the story to paint himself as the victim, which isn't surprising. Normally, I don't care about petty rumors, but I don't want potential clients to take them seriously. So, I messaged my brother, warning him that if he didn't stop spreading lies about me and my restaurant, I'd make sure he lost his current job. I hope this works because I have no desire to waste time on this nonsense. I have too much work to do, and this is definitely not the time for such distractions. Update 2. My brother responded, saying he'd stop only if I made him a partner in the business. I honestly don't know what level of delusion and stupidity he's living on. Besides, if he wants to be a partner, does he not realize how counterproductive it is to badmouth the very restaurant he's trying to join? I'm pretty sure this is my father's tactic to get his favorite son into a prestigious position without doing anything useful. Unfortunately for them, this won't work with me. I told my brother that if he didn't stop, he'd be hearing from my lawyers, and that he wasn't in a position to dictate terms to me. The only reason I hadn't taken action yet was my reluctance to get involved in unnecessary drama. But if he tries anything after this, I'll make sure he regrets it. He should take this as his final warning. I really hope he listens, for his own good. Update 3. So, it's been about a month since the last update. I've been very busy, which is why I couldn't share what happened right away. My brother did stop badmouthing me behind my back, but they still desperately tried to latch onto my success. A few weeks ago, my father and brother decided to visit me to intimidate me. They showed up at my house and threatened to sue me for using my mother's name for the restaurant. They even claimed they had already spoken to a lawyer and said that if I didn't want trouble, I should make my brother a partner as soon as possible. Of course, I immediately knew they were bluffing because no sane lawyer would take such a ridiculous case. It seemed they forgot one important fact: she was my mother too. As far as I know, there's no law that could stop me from using her name. By that point, I'd had enough of their nonsense and told them that if they didn't leave me alone, I'd have to call the police. My brother lost it and tried to grab me by the collar, but thankfully my father held him back. I think the constant humiliation finally got to him, and he snapped. But that's not my fault, and they're lucky I didn't call the police right then and there. I told my father to get the hell out, but instead, he sent my brother to cool off in the car and asked to speak with me privately. After my brother left, my father tried to manipulate me, saying that if my mother knew what I was doing to them, she'd be deeply disappointed, and I should bury the hatchet. At that moment, I told him to leave me alone because even I have limits. He couldn't use my mother's memory to get what he wanted. It was just too low. And honestly, we were far past the point of reconciliation. Not once in all this time had either of them tried to apologize to me, so I truly don't understand why they expected forgiveness when they hadn't even asked for it. As for what my mother would have felt, I'm sure she would have been just as disappointed when my father refused to pay for my education, and every single time he made me feel worthless. He's the last person who should lecture me on what my mother would approve of. I know she's proud of me, wherever she is, and nothing my father says will change that. At least my restaurant is thriving, and I hope we'll be able to expand soon. What do you think about this whole story? Share your thoughts in the comments. In my opinion, the author is absolutely in the right here. Honestly, I wouldn't have had the guts to pull off what he did at the restaurant. But he stood up to them and laid everything out in the open. That's exactly how you should handle people like that. He showed courage and integrity. He's done nothing wrong, and there's no reason to judge him. Thanks for watching this story to the end. Check out our previous videos here. Subscribe to our channel for more long-form stories like this, and see you next time.